Airline crew stopped a couple from first class. They didn't know they were FAA inspectors. The cabin of Flight 782 was buzzing with the usual hum of chatter, the soft whir of the engines, and the faint clinking of silverware as first-class passengers sipped their champagne and scrolled through their devices. The air was calm, almost serene, with sunlight streaming in through the oval windows, painting soft streaks of gold across the plush seats. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisles, offering warm smiles and polite assistance to the elite travelers reclining in leather luxury. In the midst of this orderly environment, an older couple quietly entered the first-class section. They were unassuming at first glance. The man, in his late 50s, wore a simple gray suit with no designer flair, and his wife, a poised woman in her early 50s, had her hair neatly tied in a low bun, dressed in a modest, navy blue outfit. No one would have guessed that these two were far from ordinary travelers. Their demeanor was calm, courteous, almost too ordinary for the lavish first-class cabin. As the couple settled into their seats, sipping water and reviewing the in-flight menu, the flight attendants took note of them. Something about their mannerisms, the lack of overt excitement or recognition of their surroundings, made one of the attendants, Lisa, pause. She had been trained to notice subtle cues, though nothing in her training had prepared her for what would happen next. "Excuse me, sir," Lisa said politely, approaching the man with a tray of appetizers. "I just need to confirm your seating. You're in first class, correct? May I see your boarding passes?" The man nodded and handed over the tickets. Lisa's brow furrowed slightly as she examined them. "These don't seem to match the assigned seats," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "First-class seating requires proper confirmation. Let me check with the captain." Before the conversation could escalate, the couple exchanged a subtle glance. It was the kind of look that spoke volumes between two people who had shared countless experiences together, a silent understanding that this was not the first time they had been underestimated. "Is there a problem?" the woman asked softly, her tone polite but firm. Lisa hesitated, unsure of how to handle the situation. "It's just that, these seats aren't matching the records. I'm going to have to ask you to move, just until we clarify everything with the captain." At that moment, the atmosphere shifted. Whispers rippled through the cabin as passengers noticed the gentle tension building. Some of the more observant travelers sensed the unease and glanced toward the scene unfolding near the front. The man stood slowly, maintaining an air of calm dignity. "I understand," he said quietly. "We'll follow your instructions." As they moved toward the aisle, Lisa's colleague, Mark, who had been monitoring the situation from the back of the cabin, approached and leaned toward Lisa. "Something feels off," he whispered. "They're too composed." Most passengers would have protested or been flustered. Lisa nodded but continued professionally. "Sir, please, just this way." The couple followed without resistance, moving toward a pair of seats closer to business class. But just as Lisa reached for her tablet to notify the captain, a sudden voice rang through the cabin. "Excuse me, I think there's been a misunderstanding," a third crew member said as she hurried to the scene. She held a small badge in her hand, the metallic glint catching the sunlight. "These passengers are FAA inspectors. They are authorized to observe and evaluate in-flight operations, and they are allowed in first class as part of their inspection duties." Time seemed to freeze. Lisa and Mark exchanged stunned looks. The man and woman turned toward the crew member with composed smiles, their identities now revealed. "I'm sorry for the confusion," the woman said gracefully, her voice calm and authoritative. "We're here to observe, not to disrupt. Everything is standard procedure on our end." The cabin crew, suddenly aware of the situation, felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. A few passengers nearby whispered in astonishment, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the couple. No one had realized that the seemingly ordinary pair had the authority to oversee the very airline operations they had taken for granted. Lisa quickly regained her composure. "I apologize," she said earnestly, bowing slightly. "We didn't recognize you." "Of course, please take your seats." The couple returned to first class, now seated with unobtrusive grace, observing the cabin without attracting further attention. Yet, the incident had left a subtle imprint on the crew, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that authority is not always announced with fanfare. Throughout the flight, the FAA inspectors maintained their low profile, making careful notes and observing interactions, yet they radiated an aura of quiet authority. Occasionally, the crew would glance at them, now with respectful recognition rather than suspicion. The story of this incident would later circulate within the airline, growing into a small legend among the staff. The day a seemingly ordinary couple in first class turned out to be the very inspectors they were trained to defer to. It became a cautionary tale, a lesson in humility and awareness, and a reminder that protocol should always be followed with care, no matter how routine the situation seemed. By the time Flight 782 landed smoothly at its destination, the cabin crew had learned a subtle but powerful lesson. People are not always what they appear to be. Authority can come quietly, almost invisibly, and the smallest act of assumption or oversight can lead to a remarkable revelation. For the passengers, it was just another flight, punctuated by smooth service and comfortable luxury. But for Lisa, Mark, and the rest of the crew, it had been a moment of quiet revelation, a story they would share in hushed tones and with a touch of pride. How a couple they had stopped in first class turned out to be the eyes and ears of the Federal Aviation Administration, observing every detail, every procedure, every nuance, and in that subtle, unexpected twist, the ordinary became extraordinary. The mundane became a lesson, and the flight itself transformed into a story worth remembering.